2024 meeting of the Charter Review Committee. I'm Dave Grant, the chair, and so I'm calling the meeting to order, and we will have roll call.
Chair Grant, I'll do the roll call this evening. Member Chris West. Present. Joy Kuzer. Present. Rick Wodoili.
Present.
Oh, thank you. Mark Cottle.
Yes.
Chair Dave Grant.
Here.
Vice Chair Neil Shannon.
Here.
Paul Mayer. Here. Zena Mays. Here. Deb Deers. Here. Michelle Nedwick. Here. Lisa Patterson. Here. Council Liaison Mays. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We are going to have approval of the, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say minutes, but I meant agenda. You've probably all seen the agenda, so I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda as it is.
I move.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes. Thank you, board. We're moving on to citizen comments. So I don't see a lot of citizens here. So the only item that I would say is that we did receive an email. I think you probably all received the email from the gentleman from Troutdale. That was a little while ago, April 1st. That will be entered into the record as a citizen comment, a written citizen comment. So,
and, Mr. Chair, there are no comments online, just for the record.
There's no, okay, all right,
online.
so that's it for citizen comments. Let's move on to new business. We are going to start with approval of the minutes from our March 21st meeting. You've got the minutes in your packet. Does anyone want to make any comments on the minutes? Okay, then I will accept a motion to approve the minutes.
Move. Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. We approve the minutes from the March 21st, 2024 meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it carries. Thank you, board. New business. That's item B in new business. So now we're getting to the meat. We're going to discuss the mostly the stuff in the packet that came. Do you, Ryan? Do you want to start with just like just kind of walk through what you showed us and kind of where we're at? Because basically we sent you back with a couple of different things to look into, and one was like options with respect to the what they call the charter or the item 47 provision in our charter that limits our ability to caps our ability to increase rates at certain fees, and the other was something to do with pulling the other cities around us for what they're doing with council compensation. Really, sure. That's pretty much the two things that we left you with at the end of the last meeting. So you want to kind of walk us through that, or what you're seeing, what you did?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Be happy to do that, Mr. Chair. So we'll start, if it's okay. This is probably the easiest one to get out of the way first. Is the council commission. Did everybody see the stipend sheet that I sent out? Does anybody need a paper copy of that? Okay. Sure, pass them down if you don't mind. So, of the cities in Oregon, it is relatively rare that council is compensated or that the mayor would be compensated. That's the takeaway from this. Started doing the research, called down, just talking to some cities locally around here, got on the phone with Newburgh, and Newburgh City Recorder was kind enough to say, you know what, we just did this 6 months ago. I've got a stipend list that can cut your research short. So thank you to the Newburgh City Recorder. I'll give the Newburgh City Recorder a shout out. So that lays out the basics of what we have. I will note that Wilsonville's not on here. Wilsonville does compensate their council, and the amount of compensation for the mayor is $2,350 a month. The council president is $1,100 a month, and the general council members are about $800 a month. And so that would that'd be that information. Does anybody have any questions about that specifically that I can address? That's the information. Pretty straightforward.
Okay. So I guess maybe it's a political question, but is there movement for this, or is this something that council has asked us to review, or you know, what, I guess I'm kind of, just want to make sure we all understand why we're talking about it right now and what brought this to light. Because when I was on council, and I was on council for 12 years, Mark was on council, Keith, and, you know, we didn't, at that time, we didn't really want compensation. We kind of liked the fact that we didn't have it. So
So I brought this forward last time, and
go ahead and push the button on your mic so the circle is green. You have to push really hard. There you go. Thank you.
okay, how's that? So I'm the one that asked the question last time, and it really has to do with what other communities are talking about with regards to limiting people that can participate. That's the whole premise behind why it's being talked about in a lot of communities. I'm not sure that it's applicable to us, but it is something that other communities are talking about as a hindrance to diversity on councils and boards. So, and I think the only other thing is that I've heard from other communities has to do with fixing if somebody uses their own credit card that's linked to miles or something like that, the nuance with that being fixed or dealt with in a charter. So that's what I have to put
Well,
forward.
because it would be compensation because you're reimbursing me for something but I'm getting these miles.
Yes.
That's the
The state
position.
of Oregon's a big stickler on that.
That's the position of the Oregon Government Ethics Committee, is that that would be compensation. It's okay as long as your charter or whatever the normal compensation is allows for that, but if there is no compensation, then that is not okay.
So would it work if we just said, reimbursement for expenses paid, including mileage on, or bonuses on credit cards is the compensation?
You could do that, yes, sir.
And that would fix the ethics issue.
Yes, sir, I believe it would.
You're saying if you use a card that gives you miles or that gives you cash back or something like that, you're being compensated, but then you're double dipping when you get the cash back? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not saying it. The Oregon Ethics Committee has said
I
that.
get it. I just want to understand what you're
Yeah, I
planning
think
there.
they're full of it,
No,
but-
I know this is not your rule.
No kidding.
Okay. All right.
Like, those benefits would only be if you are being reimbursed for those expenses by the city. So,
I'm not
Where
sure I
versus, like-
understand the question.
well, for the ethical, like, having benefit, being on the council, if we're paying for that travel and not being reimbursed by the city, that wouldn't apply either. So it'd only be if we reimbursed the travel, which,
What the Oregon Government Ethics Commission says is that as a city councilor, if you are in a position to use your card to go on a city trip, then you are taking advantage of a benefit that's not available to the general public. If you were just paying for it on your own,
yes, so
that'd be fine.
it would be a city card though, like
Yeah.
not a personal paid trip.
Well, the issue is if we travel, if anybody on the council or planning commission travels for, I mean, we used to send the manager back to Washington DC all the time and council members back. And if they put that on their credit card and then we reimbursed them, the ethics committee saying they're getting bonuses, so it's a violation of their ethics.
that's right.
Or violation of the charter, which would be a violation of the ethics.
And
Yes.
so the solution is to put in the charter that they're allowed to do that?
Well, that's one solution, or the other solution is, the other solution is, don't use your credit card.
Oh.
But that's a stupid solution, right? I mean, how do you do it?
It's pretty hard.
My concern is that putting that, we've tried to compensate, or we've suggested that several times, and citizens don't seem to like it. And I think there's something more important that we need to get done in the charter than that issue. And I wouldn't want to put them out on the same, because the other one's so important that we get it resolved.
Yeah.
That's
Are
my-
we open to anything with it not being in there?
I'm
Okay, you're saying yes.
I'm sorry, are we open to?
Yeah, and criticism or scrutiny or whatever, if we don't have a clause that says it's okay. Because I don't know who has a credit card that doesn't have
Sure.
benefits. I mean, that's just not reasonable.
So the other option would be to have the executive assistant book the travel and use the city credit card to do that. So, I don't see a lot of risk to the city. It's risk to the individual politician, if you will, if they use their card for that. They could also reimburse the city whatever the value of the miles is, however you figure that out. But that's what the Oregon Government Ethics Commission says.
So, okay, so what I'm hearing, Neil, did you have a question? I think you were.
Well, only my question is, how are we currently dealing with it?
Either Tina, the executive assistant, can book the trip, or a council member can use their own credit card, incur the miles, and then pay the city back, is what the advice is.
It's hard when there's a per diem, though, because, what do you do when you get $20 to buy your lunch when you're there, and how do you do that? So it's a problem, but it's a problem the council has, and they can suck it up and figure it out.
I kind of agree that it's probably not worth putting on a ballot.
Okay. Keith?
Two quick things, Chair. One, you might want to suggest, like, not uncommon in meetings and regional meetings, if you want to ask a question, like maybe tilt your card up.
Yeah.
So they make sure.
I forgot about that,
get
yeah.
the attention, and have the chair be sure and keep an eye out. And then secondarily, yes, I mean, I used it a couple times, then I think I gave it back. When I got back into this in 18, I got a city credit card. I was given a city credit card to use. And I ended up, rarely used it, and sometimes I'd have staff book the travel or whatever. So there's lots of ways. And for the risk of the elected to deal with a very stupid interpretation of the law by Salem Ethics Board.
It's not just Salem, the IRS did the same thing to NBA refs back in the early 2000s, where they were getting free miles, and then they taxed all the refs for the miles they got for going to games. It's amazing.
Yes, but as it stands, there are multiple avenues that an elected can use to incur expenses and not violate the ethics. So,
Okay.
if there is interest in dealing with this, my only comment would be have it go into effect in the future. If at any point you want to suggest altering compensation, and then also you would want to factor in some sort of process to determine what that is. If you wanted to recommend the question to council to ask the community. So that's my 10 cents on 2 points.
Okay. Yep.
And just to follow up on the remainder of the discussion, which is whether or not we want to consider compensation for mayor and council. And I understand the discussion of diversity in as much as if someone is economically challenged, they don't make a lot of money, investing a lot of time in council would cost them, at least cost them opportunities. But I don't think that we're strongly affected by that argument, and so I certainly would not be in favor of compensating either mayor or council at this time. Certainly, I agree that we need to reimburse costs, but I wouldn't look at compensation.
Okay. Zana?
I think that mayors should be compensated because I wonder how many of the people in our city know how much time a mayor puts in on the unpaid job of mayor. And I think that people that are not in a position to take off from work without penalty are definitely handicapped from running for office. And it seems like people should at least know how much time a mayor puts in that job. I don't know that people will care enough to make a difference, but I think it's a considerable number of hours. Surely you have seen that, Dave.
Okay, thanks.
She's right, it is a lot of hours.
Just a point of clarification, going back to the credit card issue and the ethics. We can solve that just with policy within the city of Sherwood, though, right? We don't need to put this on.
No. For employees, you can solve it with policy. For
Not for
council
them.
members,
Okay.
it's very clear in the charter.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
A question for Keith or Kristen. Do you know if that subject's ever come up in the community for any of the positions?
So the question has been put before the voters twice in the last 30 years, and both times it was rejected to change the charter.
Soundly.
With regards to compensation.
Yeah, just to, and the question both times was just to remove the provision in the charter. It wasn't to suggest a replacement provision. Yeah. Yeah. And different, yeah, that's the history.
So back to what Mark was saying, if we can expect it to be, have resistance, it could take down the other stuff on the ballot, or it would be a separate ballot. But still, it could draw negativity on stuff that we want to do that we feel more importantly about more urgently, right?
Yeah, in theory, not to limit, I'm not suggesting anything, but this group could suggest things to the city council to ask the community, but you don't have to ask the community all the questions at the same time.
Yeah. All right. So right now, we don't have an action item on separately for this, so I think what we're going to do, just staying on the agenda, is just, Ryan, if you would, let's move on to the next point, since everybody's said what they want to say about this, and the other item, which is the limitation on our, or the cap on our fee increases that is causing problems. Do you want to go ahead and?
Sure, thank you, Chair. So let's talk a little bit, Section 47, and I'm sorry you don't have this in front of you. After July 1st, 2015, any ordinance, resolution, or order approved by a majority of the City Council that imposes a new city tax, charge, or fee and/or increases by more than 2% annually any city utility tax, charge, or fee, including but not limited to water charges, sewer and surface water charges, and street utility fees that are imposed on residential properties occupied by owners and/or occupants within the City of Sherwood boundaries shall not be effective unless ratified by a majority vote of the city's qualified electors, voting in an election where at least 50% of the registered voters cast a ballot, or the election is held in May of an even-numbered year or November of any year. So the issue that we are dealing with, and Kristen, our assistant city manager, is here. We're going to both handle this if we can. The sewer fund is certainly, as it says by its plain text, limited by Section 47 of the Charter. And what that means is that it makes it, with inflation the way it is, it does make it difficult to save for some sewer replacement stuff, for some operations and maintenance things. And as I said, inflation has in the past year or two certainly outpaced the fees and the amount we're able to raise it. And the expenses outweigh our ability to increase services to the public in those areas. So with that being said, happy to answer questions about that. But I did want to present some options. Obviously, what's not in here is you don't have to do anything. So please don't take this as me saying these are your only options. But to the extent you do want to do something, I have provided some options here for you. You can remove the sewer and storm section from Section 47. You can tie an increase to each utility's financial plan, tie it to the CPI or the ENR. You could raise it from 2 to 4. You could repeal Section 47 in its entirety. So, really any of those but the last one. The last one would just be a straight up repeal. Just about any other of those options would be a repeal and replace, because the way, as you saw, that charter provision is worded would make it pretty difficult to just kind of piecemeal that in and out. So we would do a rewrite on that. So yes, with that, I'm sorry.
Okay,
So, and just for clarity, as Ryan is suggesting, the status of the sewer storm fund is it is technically from my perspective as elected, it's failed because the general fund is currently loaning the sewer fund $600,000 to do a significant maintenance project because it's critical. And we don't have the reserves in that fund. So.
Okay. Neil?
Well, I did ask one question, Ryan, and did you get that answer? Which is, has the city increased the rates, the maximum 2% since this provision was put in place?
Yes, I believe we have every year. So we do a fee, sorry, my mind just went blank, a fee schedule every year that we bring before council, and we increase it in recent years as much as we can.
In 18 or 19, we literally passed a resolution saying it will be 2% every year, just so there's no confusion, just to, even if it was a zero inflation rate, we knew the fund was at risk. The water fund is in decent shape today, but there's things that we don't, the challenge, big challenge with sewer and storm is inflation, high inflation and a low inflation number, and the fact that we as a city do not control the obligations that we must meet. So Clean Water Services is responsible for a big part of that expense, and they turn around and charge the city. The stuff that the city does, we have to meet standards set by or under contract by Clean Water Services. So we can't say, oh, we're going to save money and we're not going to do this blah, blah, blah inspection. Or we're going to save money and not do this storm clean out. We have a very prescribed set of obligations that we must do under contract and report those projects. So,
I got two questions. Keith, isn't that true also for the water fund? Because aren't we buying our water through the consortium? And so they set the rate and we're stuck with that rate.
it's similar but not as extreme.
Right.
Because we own so much of the infrastructure. But when it comes to like the treatment plant, it's under contract.
So how much deferred maintenance do we have in both stormwater, sewer, and water right now that we have to pay back to the general fund, or we're not doing things that we should be doing? Do we know?
I don't have that. I just know that when we got the critical project alert and we obligated the $600,000.
And our last study was done in 2021. And at that point, in 10 years, we were going to be about $1 million short.
Okay, so it seems like whatever we do, we have to build in something that allows for us to make up that money, because the money has to go back to the general fund. There's not an option to say, no, we're not going to pay the general fund back.
Right. And Craig was saying it's probably more than $1 million now, because that was done back in 2021, the projection. And on water, he did indicate the recommendation back then was to go to 3% instead of 2%. So it's not nearly as bad, but we are still a little bit short there from where we really need to be to keep up with
Could you put
maintenance.
47 back up? Sure. So I could just see the words. Can I just say, couldn't we just put in there no more than CPI plus 2% annually? And just leave the rest the same, and then you get, every year you get whatever the average CPI was plus 2% to pay for the deferred maintenance.
I think that's an option.
And then my concern is rewriting it. You're going to have the people that, because I don't remember, you all remember 2015, we had a rather difficult city council. I don't know what else to say. But they also had a following too. And so there's going to, whatever we do, if we rewrite it or get rid of it, there's going to be a significant uprising about it. Sure. But if we just target something that would fix it, most people are going to look at it and say, okay, cost of living increase plus 2% for deferred maintenance. Okay.
Now, I ran some numbers, and basically we stayed pretty even until 2001. And then at that point, I mean, for example, in 2001, if you use the CPI index, it would have, a dollar would have been $1.16, and if you'd used the 2% increase, it would have been $1.17. Now, that changed significantly by the time we go to 2002, where it becomes $1.26 instead of $1.20, and then you go to 2023, and it's $1.31 versus $1.22. So, yeah, I mean, inflation, we've all seen the inflation over the last couple of years. 2% worked, although I get the impression that CPI is not probably the index you want to tie to construction.
ENR.
What is ENR?
Engineering, gosh, my mind, it's the engineering, it's basically the engineering inflation.
Okay, because, yeah, the other one that was suggested was PPI, which is the Producer Price Index, which it also includes construction numbers, and there that actually was almost double what the CPI was over the last couple of years. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I certainly would be conducive or think about inflation plus a certain percentage. 2% probably works because it would be recognized by the voters more easily. But
Okay. Joy, then Zana.
Yeah, I had a couple, okay. Yeah, so a couple of questions. Do we have other options for raising money for the sewer replacement stuff? Like, it seems like we could do a bond or something to get money to replace, for a major sewer replacement thing. Like, is our only option by increasing rates?
Well, I'm sorry, what?
You could do an LID, the only thing I can think of, or no bond.
I don't know.
You can absolutely ask the community to fix, to tax themselves a certain amount to create, please tax yourselves, $5 million, pay out, over the next 5 years, 10 years, for projected stuff. Absolutely. Some dollar amount over some period of time. Yep, you could do a local option levy. You could do a fixed amount, a fixed amount per year for 5 years. You could do, hey, let's just get a fund of $5 million, $10 million, see how long it lasts. We need more, come back. The potential challenge with that is people say, okay, where are the projects? And if the project is not near you, do you care? Would you vote for it?
We're talking the city of Sherwood sewer, right?
Yeah.
So,
Right. So
don't we all pay into the sewer? Like,
So there's arguments on all options, but yes, you absolutely could do a local option levy that's a 5-year, so much per.
the thing that I think maybe I wasn't here obviously when this got put in, but like the idea it compounds every year, right? So if we're saying we have this thing that we need to address, it almost feels better to address that as a separate thing than as a rate that's going to continue to compound for eternity. And so if we are trying to establish we need funds to maintain our sewer system, our water system, whatever it is, then to me that seems like there might be a better appetite for it being a separate thing as opposed to this is now locked into my water bill, my sewer bill is going up exponentially every month, especially when everything else is going up exponentially every month. So it feels like there was a reason this was put in place. Again, I wasn't here, I don't know. But so I would hate to lose the spirit of why this clause was put here. The people cared enough about it to put it here. So it almost seems like if separating it might be a good thing. Or conversely, another approach would be try a one-time jump. We're going to do 5% this year, and then it goes back to the 2% if we need to cover immediate things. But removing a limitation that people care enough about to put in here feels a little like we're changing the spirit of things, especially in a high inflation world where everyone's already getting hit. So at least if we tell people why it's going up with a set purpose, we are funding our sewer thing, y'all vote to fix the sewer. I don't know, just an idea.
Zana, then Neil.
So just for my information, if you take $600,000 from the budget to pay for storm or sewer, how does you get $600 back from somewhere else to put back into your general budget?
Well,
Where's that come from?
that's the question, ma'am.
Right, that
so
was borrowed from the
doesn't-
investment fund and it's supposed to be a loan to be paid back.
Right, from money that's coming, and then the next year you're short
Right,
again.
but competing needs, so we keep pushing the other deferred maintenance, pushing it down the road until something happens, or Schaumburg needed to be done, and that's where it's somebody's specific area, or really only a few houses impacted, whereas people aren't gonna go, well, I'm gonna give you $600,000 to do that, I don't have any benefit. But we just keep kicking the can down the road, and then it compounds the problem.
Right, and my concern about continually asking the public to vote for a bond or something is that it would be for one thing, fine, but what about the continuing maintenance that we are obligated to do? We don't want to be like those cities back east, that their sewer systems are failing, or the water system or something, that we want to keep on top of things. It's the best thing for the public. So,
Okay,
okay.
thanks. Neil?
Well, I was
Mark,
just-
then Lisa.
Just kind of echo Xana's comment, which is if we tie an increase to the cost of living, all we've done is stop digging the hole. We haven't filled the hole that's there. And I'm not sure that as a charter committee, it's our job to fill that hole. But certainly it is our job to stop making the hole bigger. So.
Okay, thank you. Mark, then Lisa.
Yeah, I think your comment's good on big projects, but I've been in the city for 30 years, and I can rattle off 10 projects that were an emergency that we had to either go to a bank and get money for, or rob other funds to get money for. And to pass something for something like that, you have to get an election cycle. So if it happens in June, you have to wait until November to even find out if you got the money. So I think that's the problem. The question I would have for staff is, you have some deferred maintenance there, $600,000 worth, and then some. I mean, my idea isn't that you would always be able to get the 2% plus CPI. It would be council's discretion to say, this is how much we need. And it's good budgeting. We used to put 10% away of the city's budget for emergencies like this. For them to come up with a methodology saying, gee, this year we need CPI, but we don't need the 1.5%, or 2%. My concern of using something else is just like most of us don't know what those other things are. No one very few in the community is going to know. So this is part of a political issue for the council to resolve of how to sell the change too. And so I would use as simple language as possible. That's my comment.
Thanks.
Similarly, actually, to continue on that thought of stopping the bleeding and not necessarily filling the hole and keeping it simple of doing a combination of, whatever rate, inflation rate, or 2%, whichever is greater, to give us flexibility if the inflation does go below 2, then we can still go up to 2%, but then inflation, we can at least meet inflation, which I think seems reasonable to people thinking about everything's increasing in cost, but not inflation plus 2%. And then the other piece too, I like the idea about bonds, but also thinking to then in a larger context, if more of like a public works fee, or so it's not necessarily just for that sewer project, but I'm sure there's other underfunded public works projects.
Okay. Chris, then Paul.
Putting my campaigner hat on, and I agree with Neil that we've got to stop the bleeding. And then the separate issue is filling the hole. I was here, Drew, that time, and know what was behind this section. I think we can get away, the fact that Joy doesn't know the history is part of the challenge that we're going to have with the electorate. And there's enough new people here that have come in and become part of our community. So we need to keep that in our minds when we think about what we're going to be putting before the electorate. It's different than it was in 2015 or 14, whenever that was. I think we need to address it here in the charter to fix the bleeding, but need to have the council evaluate other ways to fill the hole.
I was on the campaign to put this into effect, so I'd be hard pressed to change it, especially when I see, I'm also on the budget committee, and I went through the budget today and looked at several things. One thing is that, 70% of the budget is feeding from single family homes. Another item is over 16% of the community is senior citizens. So, they're on fixed incomes, including myself. I'm thankful my wife worked for PERS. She's got a good income coming in, but I was in private industry and didn't have that. The utility and property taxes, 41% of the revenues. And thank God we have ballot measure 50 to control the property tax limits. The materials and services cost for broadband is over 3-year period is $37 million that we've budgeted. That includes this year's budget. So $600,000 is nothing compared to the broadband in the budget. So I would propose cutting back on taking the money out of broadband and putting it towards this and not affecting this ballot measure. That's a personal opinion of mine.
Okay. Mark? I think broadband, though, they have to show it in the budget, but it doesn't show the income that you're receiving from broadband also to offset that. And the problem with the 2% is that this is a hold harmless fund, meaning it has to be used for that. And so we at least have to be responsible enough to say it's got to pay for itself. I mean, the sewer and water and stormwater and the rest of the fees have to pay for themselves because they're separate budgetary items, if I remember right. The 2% kicker isn't mandatory, but we have to fill the hole too. And the only way to fill the hole is to authorize. The question for the charter should the sewer and water fill their own hole that we've dug for ourselves, or should we take it from some other aspect that the city has? Most of the budget's not controlled by the city, actually, because PERS takes out a mandatory amount that we're still filling that hole with. And so it's not as if there's a lot of discretionary funds to go raid and say, we're not going to do this or we're not going to do that. And so we have to both stop the bleeding and we have to give them the ability to fill the hole. And I don't know if 2% is the right number or 0.5% is the right number. That's for the people who can count beans to tell us what that percent should be. That's my thought.
I just had another thought as we were trying to put, change the 2%. Could we make it could we make it like a transparency clause thing where it's a pass-through? Like you keep talking about clean water services, right? If they raise 4%, we raise 4%. Like, can we make a clause in there that just says we're doing a straight pass-through, which means we don't dig ourselves any deeper on those funds and we just pass through whatever we're getting charged? And then, like I think a couple of people have said, fill the hole separately. Is that a bond? Is that a separate thing? But at least then that type of stuff isn't baked into our sustaining rates. Just a thought.
All right. Well, the only other comment I have is I don't think anybody's suggesting that we just give them carte blanche, that it's always going to be raised CPI plus some percentage. It would be a discretionary function of the city council that if we we don't like what they're doing, then we vote them out or we change the charter again. I mean, we have to have a charter review every 3 years, 4 years, 6 years.
It is important to, just to clarify for those that might not know for certain, but we have absolute dedicated funds. So that means there's a variety of revenue that is collected for storm and sewer. If there's new development pays development charges towards that, towards new capital projects, not maintenance, not replacement. And all those SDCs for storm and sewer go into a fund that cannot be spent on anything but that. Any revenue that is collected from a utility bill for storm or sewer must go to that storm and sewer fund. It can only be spent on storm or sewer. Similar in water. Parks with development fees, very, very similar. So it's important that when we talk about these funds and the challenges they're in, it's because it is a dedicated pool. And currently, the city is supplementing that fund with general fund, a loan from the general fund. But best practices, which I think is important for consideration, is to not have the general fund supplement funds, other utility funds. And in the stepping back perspective, if we're able to achieve, so far we've been close to meeting the goal of this provision, certainly in water. But when you compare it to what everyone has been facing with power and natural gas rates, we're doing very, very well. And, but if the city's general fund doesn't end up getting repaid, then those funds will be taken from other general fund obligations. Broadband, it's got to say it's its own fund. But the general fund pays for police, pays for parks, pays for the library, pays for other core services in the city. The stuff that, street maintenance that we don't get from gas tax, shared revenue, which is, of course, a dwindling pot of money. So.
Okay. Yeah. Paul and Chris?
I remember in the last budget committee, I may be wrong on this, but I think I'm right, that we borrowed some money from one of the funds to supplement the rest of the money for the bridge going to the school.
Yeah.
Why can't we do that with this?
We are.
This shortfall?
We are. Currently, we're doing that. But just like the funds that were a dedicated fund is getting the benefit of loaning a different part of the city money on a temporary basis, they're going to get repaid at a very good rate, interest rate. Our fund will get repaid. Currently, the fund that is the city is loaning sewer and storm, $600,000. There's a note that has for the city to get repaid from that fund. Right now, we don't have a way of having that happen.
Chris, then Deb.
So I think this is for Keith and Mark. Looking back prior to 15, were fees increased differently, a percentage? Let's say if the need in sewer was 3 or 4% and something else was 2%, did you guys actually make those differences in what you did, or did you just do across the board?
The general best practices for any city in Sherwood follows best practices is to do updated master plans. And as part of those master plans, to do projections on rate increases over time, so we have a proper fund to address the needs both from a capital project, of building things, but also maintaining things. And so that's the rule. We don't control, we can only guess what Clean Water Services does. And so it's a best guess. It's what we think is going to happen. But for instance, you might, if you've driven on 12 and Sherwood Road the last couple months, you'll see that they're putting a large black plastic pipe in the ground. That pipe is a forced main sewer line. Clean Water Services Board, which is the County Board of Commissioners, authorized the project in January. It is part of a $15 million project. The city wasn't even really consulted on it. $15 million project. We will be paying for it with rate increases. But it wasn't.
But my question.
So I apologize if I'm not being direct.
No, I understand the planning and looking and
Yep.
guessing.
Yep.
But I was really looking at, in the past, did you guys specifically look at a given fund and target that?
Yes.
Yeah, by law, we have to, and we spend a lot of money on experts to tell us.
Every 3 years.
Tell us exactly what the maintenance is going to be and the projected cost increases are. And then by law, city councils can't just willy-nilly do things. They have to use the evidence that they have to base their decision on. So that's why we spend tens of thousands of dollars on these experts to tell us, well, how many pipes do we have? They go through how old, they know how old they all are. They know the as-built of where they're at, and they know the replacement costs. And you have a cycle that you go through. You know, these pipes are 30-year pipes. You're going to have to replace them in 30 years. You're going to have to start saving money to do it because it's really expensive to dig into the ground.
And the message point, the talking point to modify Section 47 is it took that analysis and expertise away because you're capped and you can only do.
Yep.
And it took away best practices.
Yeah. And then there's the unexpected. So we try to plan well, effectively, and understand the situation. And as part of the required inspection by Clean Water Services that they ask us to do, is the city staff sends robots up and down sewer lines and stormwater lines. Just look at their real health underground and see how they're doing, if roots are inundating, if they're failing, if they're cracking. And that real data is then implemented to update master plans and maintenance plans.
Well, I think it's important for everyone to understand, these aren't discretionary expenditures. The state of Oregon governs us on the quality of sewer lines that we have, stormwater that we have, water lines we have, and if we fall below the standard because we don't have the money, they just look at you and say, then you're not doing anything else as a city, and you have to do that because they're not only state mandates, they're federal mandates. And so...
And contractual,
which is the least of those three, right?
Sure what Deb has to say, and then Joy.
Quick question. If we remove the sewer and storm, what does that mean? Does it become a separate section 48, and suddenly and this is how we pay for the sewer and storm? What happens technically if you just take it out?
I think if you took it out, you just took it out. I don't think it has to become a different section at all.
But don't we have to account for by the way, you know, the sewer and storm is not going to be 2%. It's going to be whatever the charge is. Or
That would all be covered in our fee schedule. So every year we put together a fee schedule that's adopted and list out all of the fees. So right now we're just limited in how much we can increase these fees, but it has all the other city service fees that aren't indicated on here. So we would just list what the new rate is. So we would still go through a public process. And I can say from sitting in council meetings before, when they evaluate fees, you know, they definitely take into consideration what the increases are going to look like and how can we step this up. You know, they don't just go, oh, we need a 50% increase, let's do it. They say, okay, let's do 2% here and 3% here. and make sure that, we're being sensitive to people's limits on budget.
My point, just to try to get us all to, whatever. But like, which problem are we really trying to solve with this rate increase? Is it, we want to be able to keep up with our vendor rates and all these other costs that get passed through? Are we just trying to be able to keep up, or are we trying to be able to keep up and at the same time also build a maintenance fund out of this rate? Is that are we trying to do both with this rate? Is that why, like, we need it to be so much more? Because I want to stay away from the fact or the idea of trying to solve a temporary problem with a permanent solution. Right. So if we want the rate to represent both maintenance with ongoing increasing vendor fees and other stuff that might come, which we can do with transparency and, clean water services, here's the charge, here's what we're passing along, that kind of stuff. Or are we also trying to solve, like, to me, if we have a bunch of replacements that need to happen, that seems like a temporary problem that should be solved separately from the rate. But if we want to use the rate to build an ongoing maintenance reserve, then to me that's a different thing. So I just wanted to come back and say, what are we trying to do with this rate? And again, make sure we're not solving a temporary problem with a permanent solution that we're just going to continue to escalate for eternity.
Mark, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I think the answer is both, because you can't do one without the other.
Right now, there's a temporary problem. There's 600,000 we're in debt, right? But we also know from experience that we always have maintenance that we got to do. And
Yeah,
that should come out of that fund,
My
right?
question was just, does that come from another source, or
No,
are we
it all
hoping it comes from this source? Because
When he
we
said-
can find a different
When he
source.
said it's a dedicated fund, it all has to come from that dedicated fund.
My point is, you can pass a bond to get sewers replaced. So that is a temporary solution for a temporary problem.
Let me explain it this way. The $600,000 is in one area, but we also know that there's deferred maintenance, meaning there's some maintenance that we're going to have to do the year after that, and then the year after that. And
I
so
get it.
we're
My
not going to
question
go
is,
out
are we
and
trying
do a
to
bond
solve
every time we need that.
This fund with this increase.
It has
Are
to
we
come from
solving
this fund.
both
It has to come from this fund. So we're going to try to solve both.
those problems?
But I don't know what the percentage should be. I mean, CPI, I don't know if that's right, or I think we could just say whatever the vendor charges us plus some percentage for maintenance. Because when Clean Water Services charges us money, they don't say, oh, and by the way, we're going to charge you a little extra so we have deferred maintenance here. That's on you guys to figure out. And so we need to, I don't know if we say, it's a pass-through plus costs, because it costs us to send out the bills, right? So it's a pass-through plus cost plus some sort of other percentage to take care of maintenance and stuff like that. Keep it simple.
Keith, you had your hand.
My one nugget is what, I appreciate all the conversation, and I want to continue to encourage it, is if you formulate a recommendation, keep it simple. And transparency is important, and we're very transparent today. We will continue to be transparent. That's the beauty of local government, is incredibly transparent compared to your state government or your federal government, or your county or metro.
So my question, when we look at the possible solutions to this that are in this document, in 6 years, are we going to be back here saying, okay, now we need to take water out of this. Now we need to take street fees out of this. Are we solving the core problem by just taking out the sewer and surface water language? Or we're going to see some of those issues?
We can't do that, because it actually says new city tax charges and fees increases, and then water charges, sewer water, surface waters are just an explanation of city utilities. So we either have to take out new city tax charge and fees, but taking out water and charges and fees does not do anything, because it would still leave in the new tax charge and fees. So we'd have to fix that whole paragraph.
So that option for discussion, remove sewer and storm from section 47 is not an option.
Yeah, and that's what I think repeal and replace is what I was talking about with that, because that would be what I said earlier, a significant rewrite of that if you were to do that. I mean, yeah. Okay. So the answer, I don't know if you were looking at me when you asked that question. The answer to your question about the water stuff is I don't know, because I don't know what the economy's going to do. And
So it sounds like we're on track from water. It's treading water, if you will.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
No, the sewer's treading water.
All right.
The part of the effort by your city council to help kind of kick the can down the road has been residential rates that is on this have stayed at the 2% adjustments since 2015, but your commercial industrial have gone up at a higher rate, just for reference, just because to try to keep the fund, and it certainly didn't prevent the sewer and storm fund from still experiencing this problem. Just FYI. But water isn't bad. But if you don't want to address it, great. I mean, I'm just worried about the big hit over the head right now. But water could be a problem if we continue to be in inflationary times, like we are today.
Isn't part of the genesis of where this came about is we had to spend a ton of money to bring water from the Willamette River here, and we were stepping it up pretty aggressively for about 5 or 6 years, which caused the citizens to say, this is ridiculous, we need something.
Yep.
Well, we've now paid that, and that we're good for water for a long time.
There are still capital investments that we make on water. Like, we're currently making a $20 million, that you don't even realize we're doing it, because it was planned. Good long-term planning in our control. And because of good planning, well, yes, we had an increase that did spur this. When we went to the Willamette, it was a $40 million project.
That we didn't have any money for.
Right, that
I was there.
in your days, you didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, it's my fault. It's my fault.
You kicked the can down the road, as you might say.
Nice, Keith.
It's the truth.
I know what happened.
And, and in a similar fashion now, because of what we can control on water, we have some of the lowest water rates in the region, because we are not part of this $1 billion project.
Well, that was during my time too that we got out of that, right? Okay.
Yes,
thank you.
we divorced, yes, and then yes.
Portland.
Yeah.
So,
But to your point, Keith, the inflation on all those other things for treating the water, the chemicals and stuff like that, are the things that we made the investment and stuff like that, but if some kind of chemical is going up 200% because of, supply chains, that's gonna.
the biggest inflator impacting the water fund today is cost of power.
It's what?
Energy, power, PGE rates, because of the energy that we pay to pump it to Sherwood.
We're still on wells, don't we still have our wells?
We still have wells that we use on a limited basis.
For everybody's experience, one of the first crises I was involved in the city, 2 of our wells went out. I mean, it's not like we planned them to go out, they just died. And if I remember right, we had to go get an emergency block grant from the federal government to replace one, and we had to borrow money to replace the other. But that's what we're trying to prevent, because those things can all still happen. We have one well that's almost 1,000 feet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's strong. Okay, Paul.
The nexus is certainly, from my perspective, of best practices, thinking long-term, keeping rates as low as for everybody as we can. We have programs for people with financial needs to help with rates. I apologize.
No, just as a point of clarification, I was told when we moved here in some kind of discussion that the 3 wells that we have are not in use, they're for emergency purposes.
The only well that is sort of active is by,
Five, isn't it?
it's the one on,
Willamette.
yeah, I think that's the one.
Willamette Street, I think.
Up top of the hill here.
Yeah.
I
But
do think
we're looking at different ways of continuing to use them both on having them on an emergency basis, and then some alternative stuff. But there's, water politics is a whole nother conversation too.
Did you have more to say, Neil?
Well, I was just going to say, I do think the Public Works does take some water out of the wells on occasion, just to make sure that they're still working, and I think also to maintain their water rights. So they take a little bit just to keep it working, but I'm sure it's a small percentage.
And it's important, city staff does a fantastic job of analyzing, our expenses and how we manage the people's dollars. Believe it or not, pumping water out of the ground is expensive too.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So what I'm hearing is that there is support here in the room for something of the nature of the third option, tying the increase to some indicator plus an amount to cover some past obligations and perhaps a reserve fund of some kind, emergency fund, something like that. And so we don't have to have an action item tonight, but we might. What we really need to do, I think, is just to direct staff to come back with something. We should just consolidate what's happening here, and all the discussion is revolved around like a CPI plus or something like that plus. Is that kind of what I'm seeing people would support?
Has everybody weighed in?
Say again?
Has everybody on the committee given you comment? Their perspective?
No.
Have they what?
Have you gotten comments from everybody around the table?
Everyone has commented, and no one's got their sign up. I'm sorry. Thanks, Keith. I didn't see you over there.
Michelle hasn't. Michelle, go ahead.
Okay, Michelle, go. Sorry.
I want everyone to be participants.
Went right over my head. No, go ahead and
Oh,
slap
there
me
we go,
if
there
I'm
we
missing
go.
somebody.
Yeah, well, I was just mainly learning from all of you, especially those of you who have been here and have a lot of history. But I do think it's important to, make sure that between now and 6 years from now, it's something that's going to hold up before everyone comes together to do this again. So I think it's important that we're discussing it and looking into it. I don't know that I would say that I want to take it out. That's my only hesitation, I guess, was the option to remove it.
Okay.
So besides the one option of some kind of CPI or something else, Joy's comment about the pass-through, I would like to have staff look at another option that instead of a CPI, it has some level associated with when we're not in charge of it, when we've got Clean Water or somebody else that we're not controlling, that there's a language option that deals with addressing that pass-through, so.
Paul?
Yeah, my only comment now is that if we do change it, since I was involved with it, and I know the feelings of people that were involved with it, putting it in, is that there is a clear explanation of why it's changing. Otherwise, I don't think it'll go through.
And I think part of our, why we're here is when we leave this room, we are in some way, maybe a letter to the editor or talking to your groups that on the boards and commissions you're on, and get the word out that there is a legitimate reason we're doing this, and because what we have right now is creating a problem. People are going to want to know why we're doing this. And outreach is going to be something that I think council will get involved with if it gets to that point. We're making a recommendation to council, and if council takes it beyond, then they also have an outreach, element of what they do if they're going to put it to the voters. And so we don't put it to the voters, we put it to council. And so, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, leadership is going to have to start right here. People don't want to see their fees messed with, and so they need to understand why. And yeah, that's absolutely the case. Yeah. Rick.
Yeah, I think to help me understand, what the best option is going to be is understand what a CPI plus or an ENR plus or a PPI plus looks like in a 10-year horizon, or whatever our timeline is for solving this particular problem, and then comparing it with a rate increase from 2% to 3% or 2% to 4%. And we have all those options in front of us, then we choose the one that's best for the taxpayer, I suppose.
Do we know if other cities have this issue and how they addressed it?
I don't believe I found
Okay.
any charter provision like this in any other city.
Poach somebody else's solution.
So you looked at League of Oregon Cities? It seems like that was one of the things you were going to do.
League of Oregon, this is unique to Sherwood.
Yep, nowhere else in the state.
Not in League of Oregon cities, to clarify.
Well, and I was going to comment, this really only address city fees. If Clean Water Services raises their rates 10%, that's a pass-through on the bill. City doesn't have any control over that. So
It isn't controlled by this?
it is not. Only the city fees are controlled by this.
No, I don't think that's right.
Isn't that true? Oh,
We're constrained
Okay.
from adding, even if our costs go up.
Because we bill for, Clean Water Services tells us what they're charging us, and then we bill the citizens only up to 2%. So if they raise it 15%, we only get 2%.
so I look at my water bill and I see a dozen different fees attached to that water bill. But those fees, which, clean water, they're listed, Clean Water Services and so on and so forth. So even if Clean Water Services raised their rate 5%, the city could only raise
That's why
on
we're
the
talking
bill?
about this. Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah, much more of a problem.
Paul?
Could you, Keith, you have the background, you kind of explained it in our first meeting about Clean Water Services that's outside our purview. Can you explain that again?
You bet. So 40 years ago, every city had their own sewer plant, and in Sherwood, ours was down by Still Wilson Park. It's currently the parking lot. They converted it into a parking lot. That was our sewer plant. Most sewer systems, every city was old technology, not up to snuff, and different communities are growing. There was a decision with all the cities and the county to form the Unified Sewage Agency, USA. And it was a special service district, and the board of the special service district is the county board of commissioners. And they turn around and formed the organization, and then entered into contracts with every city to kind of divvy up responsibilities. And Clean Water Services, now they rebranded it Clean Water Services, they quickly started building huge modern sewer stormwater
The one over
plants.
by Tiger High School is a good example of that.
Yeah, that's the Durham treatment plant. And then they turned around and did a massive infrastructure of big pipes all over Washington County, and that backbone really spurred economic development in Washington County, because now that big piece of infrastructure grid in the county. So we have two sewer lines that go towards Durham, one cutting across what's now the refuge property, and then one that kind of cuts by the DEQ station across going north. And that contract has evolved over time, but they are charged with treating all of it, and they turn around and charge cities for that service.
So just so you understand,
And
this
then-
almost bankrupted Sherwood. When this all happened back in the 80s, I said LID, Sherwood had to create an LID in order to pay for the sewer line that went up through the city essentially. And an LID is just a special tax on the city in order to pay for the sewer line. And just when I got into the city politics, we had citizens, it was because your taxes it almost bankrupted the city, because we just didn't have the new construction in order to help pay for it yet. And we're lucky that we got the new construction we did, or the city would have gone bankrupt at that time because of the need to put in the backbones.
So the county treats all that water, that wastewater, whatever type, and then they discharge it generally into the Tuolumne River. Over time, they have to get a federal permit to discharge that water. And the feds have changed the requirements placed upon them on what they can do in discharging that water. And they actually have a very unique arrangement because the Tuolumne River doesn't flow very fast. It is almost still. It's like a big lake that barely flows. And it was a big deal, which just increased pricing, is they're putting warm water into the river, and the warm water is not good for the fish and other wildlife. So they had to go through a whole process of trying to keep the water cool, and the most economical but still expensive way is they started planting shade plants, trees, shrubs along all streams of water, streams, rivers, everything, to try to keep the water cold. And the requirements keep building and building. And then to the cities, they turned around and put more and more requirements on what was the obligations of cities. So the cities never had to retain and deal with stormwater like they do today. You know, you'll see we have these stormwater ponds, and they used to be just little tiny ones. Now they're bigger, and we've been rebuilding them. They have a standard that I remember being on the Planning Commission and reviewing the new Clean Water Services standard for stormwater ponds. I said, okay, great, and it seemed like that would be fantastic. I kid you not, 10 years later, they came out with a new standard, and the city had to turn around and start rebuilding those ponds with their own money, because they had this new thing that they had to adhere to by the feds. Just like you'll see we sweep the streets. Well, it's good behavior for us to sweep the streets, but we are contractually obligated to sweep the streets on a certain frequency because of Clean Water Services, because they want to keep things from going down the storm drains. We're required to inspect at a certain frequency every kind of pipe underground. We're required to clean the storm drain wells, whatever they're called. You see the big vacuum pumps taking all the grit and stuff out of the bottom of those storm things. So those things just have continued to evolve and be more and more stringent. It used to be also a handshake, oh, we're going to make sure you're doing it. Well, now there's audits, you know, the paperwork involved, and it just increases the costs, and we have no choice.
One more question. Do we have
Let's go to Deb. I think she's been waiting a little longer,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
I'm going to get back to option one. What is the downside of pulling out all of those third-party people who we don't seem to have any control over their increases, but we're impacted by it? What's the downside of pulling all of that out and making it a separate thing?
I think I may have misunderstood your question the first time. So we have this, your question right now is, what if we pulled the water charges, sewer, and surface water charges out? That's what you're saying?
Right.
So I think the problem is the prefatory language to that, which the city council then puts a new city tax charge of fees or fee or increases by more than 2% annually. Any city utility tax charge or fee, including but not limited to water charges. So your question is, what happens if we pull those out?
Yes.
Okay.
And make it a pass-through. I mean, can you make it a pass-through as opposed to,
I think you could. I think you absolutely could do that. I mean,
so what's the downside? Besides, everybody's going to scream because it's,
Rewrite the whole thing.
yeah.
Yeah, and so there's also there is, on the city's part of the obligation of what we do, there is the cost of the work, where you're contracting out stuff, like this Schaumburg Street sewer line that we're going to replace. And we do, some of it we contract out, and then some we do internally. And projects that are done internally, be either regular maintenance or more in-depth maintenance, is great, usually efficient, but our cost of our labor does not go up by 2% a year. Our total cost of our labor does not go up by 2%.
Well, the other problem is by state law, a project over a certain amount of money has to be bidded out to be done. And so they try to prevent the cities from getting around the fair wage law by that. And so it just becomes cheaper to bid it out because
there's a whole slew of things.
Yeah.
So it's just a challenging thing. It's just a challenging thing.
Paul?
Yeah,
Oh,
the only
Deb,
other
did you
question,
have
do we have a seat on the board of Clean Water Services?
Our county, as a city specifically, no. We, our representative currently is our county commissioner for our area, which is Roy Rogers. So the county, the board of the Clean Water Services is made up of the 4 area county commissioners and the countywide county chair. So that's the seat. Our seat is through, our voice is Roy Rogers, who's retiring, and we'll have somebody new.
Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, so rewriting this entire thing, you're telling me that if we want to pull out those third parties, the whole thing has to be rewritten, which if we're going to amend it anyway, you're rewriting it to an extent.
Yeah.
So why not?
It'll be a repeal and replace, most likely, either way, just so that it's very understandable for voters.
I'm still grappling with why wouldn't we want to pull out those third parties and make them pass-throughs?
We could, but we have to rewrite it because.
Oh, I get that.
Sure.
City tax charges and stuff is the qualifier, and the water charges and sewers are just examples.
But those seem to be the big issues, right? That's the big dollars.
Okay.
So are we gonna, can I just ask, are we going to refer to the council a method of doing it, or saying, this is a problem and we support the council, and this is our recommendation? Because they can do whatever they want. They
So-
can then,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
Well,
what are,
yeah, and we'll get, Ryan, yeah, I think that we can do either. I would hope that we can get as specific as we can for council. Obviously, it's advisory.
what are, yeah, and I think the procedural way to do it is our code, actually, the council rewrote it in 2018, and it requires a memo from the board chair to council. So I would obviously help you with what the consensus of the board is, and you and I would write that and present it to the council.
Well, you, to be clear, you'll all vote on whatever you suggest to be in the memo.
Right.
And does it have to be everybody votes yes or no?
It's majority.
Majority.
Yeah, we will
And
start.
however the vote could be is, by a 7-3 majority, they are suggesting this, or
I think that was in the first document.
the more that are behind it, the better. Obviously, whatever you're suggesting.
So,
And you might be suggesting nothing. I don't.
I don't think so.
other comments? All right. There are a lot of ideas here. Go ahead, Paul.
It's in the thing. It says the motion approving the final report must be approved by at least 6 of the.
By what?
At least
Six.
6 of
At
us?
least 6 of the committee members.
Okay. Well, we would hope for a simple majority anyway, and that would be, we'd look for. What we should do is ask staff to come back with something we can vote on that's written down. I think where we are leaning is toward an indicator, an indice plus, whether it's CPI or whatever. And maybe we would start with staff confirming that one indicator is more appropriate than others according to the rate changes that we run into. And then if it's 2% that we're saying we're adding on to that, then that's the number. But you guys would want to crunch your numbers to see if that's too much or too little. And then we will vote on, in our next meeting, if we are all agreeable to make that recommendation to council. And there's no reason that we cannot ask them to come back with a couple if there's another idea that has pretty good support in this room, and then we can vote on both of them and come up with what? Yeah, Mark.
I was just gonna suggest, why don't we ask staff to do that? So instead of rewriting it, to amend it, and then also have staff come back with a rewrite saying, I also like the pass-through language. The pass-through language plus a percent for future deferred maintenance and so forth. And why don't we just come back with 2 next time so we can look at both and then see, because we may say to council, we like them both.
You guys
figure out which one you want to use.
But they have us for a reason.
I know that, but council's also not always unified, and they only know what they know, right?
I've heard that.
Yeah. They only know, and so they may want 2 options. They may not realize the other options there. So I don't have a problem sending 2 options to them.
So-
But I'd like to see what the pass-through language what a rewrite would also do to it.
Yeah, so we're talking about right now, an option, what it would look like if it was just an indicator plus 2%, and then one that would be like a pass-through. I don't know if the 2's on that, 2's on, maybe 2 not on the pass-through, but 2 on the other stuff, or something like that. Lisa, did you want to?
Yeah, I was on the pass-through language. It just sounds from like the conversations that it's not, we don't get a clean percentage increase from Clean Water Services. It's increase of cost due to certain requirements that we need to meet and maintenance and also capital projects. And so just flagging that I don't know how clean the pass-through language would be and how much background information. I guess if there is a clean language, I guess I was just questioning that, and then whether or not, with this, the work that the staff already does for the fees, for the rate approvals, does that make sense not to include these additional fees or these increases?
So are you suggesting then if the pass-through language by default also is going to have some other fee attached to it to cover the cost for us to pass it through and to cover what we do owe for what we owe to the general fund and
Emergency fund.
and, not just emergency fund, but deferred maintenance?
Yeah.
Just so it would include both those concepts. The pass-through language would include both those concepts.
Well, that's what's included in the rate increase, right, each year?
Not now, but it could be.
I mean, what Clean Water Services rate increases to
They
the
don't
city.
increase the rates and tell us what your maintenance is going to be. They just say, this is what we're charging you for this, and you have to figure out your own amount that you need for maintenance.
I guess that's what my point is, right?
Yeah.
That it's not a clean pass-through.
Right, it's not.
It's still-
It is a unique relationship. There's not a lot of clean water service organizations with cities like us. But it's, right. It generally works well. It tries to make things, the treatment is very efficient by having just 3, and they're very innovative, to their credit.
So let me ask staff, is that clear enough? Are all of our expenses identifiable as being passed through or not, or is some of it muddy?
Yeah, and I think I speak for Chris and I as well. We'll want to talk to our interim city manager, Craig. You all know Craig, our public works director. He's an expert in this area, so we'll want to get his weigh in on this. We'll certainly be able to bring you back some options either way, and may even have Craig here next time to weigh in on those as well.
Okay. All right. Is everybody, I'll just take head nods. Are we comfortable that one of these 2 frameworks that they're going to show us in our next meeting is kind of representative of what we're pretty much comfortable here, at least 6 of us?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll take 7.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you've got your direction from us. I don't think we need a resolution of this council to direct you that way, or this, I said this council, I meant this board. Oh, I'm sorry, Deb. For some reason,
That's okay. That's
you're
okay.
outside my peripheral vision.
I'm not going to talk about the money, but I'm talking about the 50% of registered voters clause, which on a special election, you're never going to get 50%. And so as I said last time, you're guaranteeing it's going to fail. And so if you're bringing it as an emergency, you're going to fail. Can you just take that out regardless? Because I don't know why something like that would have been put in to begin with, but that seems...
Personalities, that's why.
Well,
Well, it's an intentional poison, though, wasn't it? So
Yeah, it was.
Right,
It
so-
was intentional because of the, like Chris said, because of like 5 years before the fees went up and up and up.
Well, and I have enough gray hair that I remember back then that there were a lot of issues of school bonds that were always being put in off elections because they could get the bond passed without a lot of people paying attention to it. And so that's, I mean, in some ways, I still support that because you're still allowed the May or, what is it, May and November? So, I mean, you still have a chance twice a year.
No, every other year.
Every other
Oh,
year,
every
that's
other
the
year?
problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
An even year, which.
So
Okay.
if you're bringing something as an emergency in an odd year, this language guarantees it's going to fail because you're never going to get 50% of the population voting.
Well, that's an easy strike through. If we all agree just to amend it, then we can always agree just to strike that.
I think
sentence.
if we make these changes, then that is unnecessary. That language that you're talking about really is unnecessary in the charter at
I don't know
all.
why you'd have it. Yeah.
Say again?
I don't know why you'd have it in there.
Personalities.
Bad
I'll leave it at that, yeah. So, I think you guys have your.
We have
homework.
direction.
And would anyone else like to make some final comments before we adjourn? What's that?
You want a motion to adjourn?
Well, yeah, or, Joy, did you?
I just wondered if, going back to this credit card thing, if it is an ethical issue, could maybe you draft up some quick harmless language that says, hey, we're okay with it if y'all have credit card rewards?
Sorry,
I
you're
mean,
mumbling.
if, my question was going back to the credit card thing, like where people get rewards on their credit cards. So if they, if it's an ethical violation, I'd hate for someone to like get caught by that just doesn't understand. So my question is, could Ryan draft up some harmless, quick, simple, easy language that says, if you guys get credit card rewards, it's fine with us type?
Yeah,
proposal.
if that's the consensus of the folks here, I'm happy to do that, happy to bring language back if you
I
think.
think that'd be helpful. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what you come up with.
And other cities have dealt with it, right?
I think so. I think they have.
I don't think it was on the comparison at all. I don't remember reading that.
The problem with it in the policy question was really where it we tried to go with it at first, but the charter is very clear. It says council shall receive no compensation. So you can't go around a charter with policy that says yes you can. So that's where we're at.
Well, it says that they may be reimbursed for actual and reasonable expenses, and
Right.
is there a extra line there that we could add to the reimbursable that if, paid by personal card?
Yeah, if you were going to fix it, that's how you would fix
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Or couldn't you just strike shall and say may? So it's permissive instead of
Yeah.
mandatory?
Good.
What?
Housekeeping change.
Yeah.
It is. Neil, did you have one more thing to say?
Well, totally different off of water and sewer and fees and all of that. First of all, I really want to thank Ryan for putting that pretty extensive table.
Let me stop you there and give credit where credit is due. No, we have a fantastic law clerk here at the city of Sherwood, so shout out to Emma Gill. She spent a lot of hours getting that done.
But it was fascinating reading what all the different cities go through and so on and so forth. One question that kind of came up, and I asked that, is there was the discussion of state-allowed debt. And I was curious, what is the city of Sherwood's current debt?
Well, we have, I believe our finance director sent an email back to me, and you're stretching my memory here. I think it was Friday, and I'm sorry, I thought he had copied you on that, but I believe we have zero general obligation bond debt right now.
Okay. And the state limit right now is, I think, what, $5,000?
The general state limit, ORS 227-410 says $5,000. However, there's a subsection there, subsection B, that says that a city or a local government can get around that by in the charter or an ordinance or something like of that nature, right? And so if you look at our charter language, it says a charter amendment is not necessary to go over the
So
state amount.
basically, the city council could pass an ordinance that says that we can have more debt than that.
Or adopt a budget, correct.
Or even adopt by a budget. So anyway, I just wanted to throw out there whether or not anybody on the charter wanted to discuss city debt. Not that I really do, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. Then the other one that I found fascinating was reading some of the different city charters that discuss parks, and particularly selling. Oh, yeah, Tualatin, that took 3 pages. But particularly the issues of if the city decides to sell a portion of an existing park. And could you remind me what City of Sherwood's policy is? I think it's, 5 acres?
Yeah,
or-
so 5 acres, if it's more than 5 acres, it requires a supermajority vote of council, which is 5.
Right. And again, I just.
And a loss of all their jobs when the citizens find out.
Right. Well, and that's why I just wanted to throw it out there, whether or not anybody on this charter committee wanted to discuss something like that. So those are the only 2 things that I found interesting, and I'm just throwing up in the air.
As the parks person, I also noticed that clause and found it interesting, and that was one that I also wondered if people wanted to. I realized we were talking a lot with this rate thing, so I don't know if we want to muddy the waters, but that one, I think it's a good idea to protect our public parks and keep them public for, like, that's the one that I read, like, keep it public forever type conversation. I think that's a good idea. The other one, not to change topics, but to throw the other one out just for consideration, is that I saw a lot of our neighboring cities had the public transit rules in there. And I didn't read a lot into it because I'm sure it had something to do with Max coming to Tigard. But that was another one. Those are just the 2 that stood out when I was reading through them, because I think that was the list of other miscellaneous things people had that we might want to consider. Sherwood's not too far away from Tigard and Tualatin.
Well, I look at that also, but I figure I looked at all 3 that are surrounding us prohibited.
Yeah.
So we're kind of already got the shields up.
Maybe.
But
Sounds about railroad track that runs right here.
On the park thing, if I remember, we passed that for a particular purpose, but at one time, all of our parks were essentially wetlands area because people were giving it to us for Parks SD3. Instead of paying us money, they were giving us all their wetlands area. And right now, the city went down a road where we were doing these top lot parks. Cinnamon Hills has one across, and we found that horrifically expensive to do. And
What park did you call that?
They're called tot lots.
Oh.
I mean, Cinnamon Hills has one. Pocket parks? Yeah, pocket parks. And we stopped doing it
Langers
because they were
has
they
one.
were eating our whole parks budget just to maintain them. And so, I don't know if I want to limit the council's ability to say, we not only don't want these, we've decided to go to more regional sized parks, and we want to get rid of them because they are really expensive to maintain. So that's, I mean, I don't know if the council's never threatened to sell any of the major parks that we call parks, or even considered it, have they?
No, and I think the reason that the 5 acres was in there was the YMCA, if I'm not mistaken.
To protect the YMCA.
Yep. Okay, further comments?
No, there's political stupidity, and we're also a very active community in punishing stupidity. Recalling people before they make decisions.
You guys are good?
Yeah, one more.
Okay, Paul?
I'd like to see this, can you give this to,
Oh, yeah,
have it sent out?
I'll give this to staff, and I'll let them check my numbers and make sure that I did it right. I mean, I'm no brilliant, but I mean, this will give them some direction that they can follow. So, yeah, I'll be happy to give that to staff.
Okay.
I think that'd be a good resource piece to look at.
Oh, his rate increase projections based upon 2% CPI, et cetera.
Yeah, CPI and PPI are the 2 that I looked at.
All right, other comments?
we adjourn?